Hi, good to be here. So I'll start with my personal stories, how I got involved in all this journey of education reform. And it starts at the age of 14. So when I was 14, I discovered that I was luckier than most of my classmates and even most of the 2 million Soviet kids who studied in the same time in the 9th grade. I get a call from a school headmaster where I studied, and she asked my mom whether I wanted to go as an exchange student for 1 year in the United States. Well, first we were shocked, then we had serious discussions about for 5 minutes, and we said, yes, I'm going to go to United States, while the headmaster still waiting on the phone for the answer. So that's how I ended up in United States, in California, in a beautiful private school in Pasadena, in a school with great teachers, interesting students, with parrots and colibri birds in the yard. And here I am sitting in an English lesson with Mr. Pickering. And Mr. Pickering is asking us to recall one very memorable event in our lives. So we come up with some stories and we try to impress him. And he says, guys, that's not bad. That's even worse than that. You have to come up with something more interesting, with more memorable. And we get angry and we try to come up with new stories. Some kids even make up their own stories as if it happened to them. But Mr. Pickering is not impressed at all. And he says, well, you know, guys, schools can be an interesting place. And at that moment, I'm thinking, oh, no, he'll start a lecture about us needing to open up our eyes and be open to the world, etc., etc. But he says, wait, you'll see. And he was not a man of lectures. He was a man of actions. He climbed up on the table around which we were sitting. He ran across the table and jumped into the yard through a very narrowly opened doors. And as soon as I picked up my jaw, I thought, the school can be an interesting place, and I really want to become part of it as part of my profession. So that's how I became a teacher. And then after becoming a teacher, I learned how to teach. And then I was invited by the government to do some reforms in Georgia. Then I went to the university to teach there as well and to do some research. And I had the opportunity to talk with hundreds and thousands of people involved in education. And I was asking them what they thought the problems of education are. And there were a lot of very important problems that they identified, and they were all right. But there is one problem that is rarely recognized by educators, by scientists, by parents, by politicians. And I want to talk about that problem. And that problem is that our education system is centered around the philosophy and about the processes of waiting. So what we basically have is a pedagogy of waiting in our schools. And that resembles a lot a space of an airport. So our schools are like airports where people are told what to do, when to do, what not to do. So kids are told what to put in their bags and not to put the bags where they don't belong. And they have to wait for the fixed timetables that they cannot control. But no matter how long the layover is, they know that they have the ticket and they will get to the destination unless they lose that ticket. Well, one good side of the airport is that you can have a nap there, unlike in our schools. But what are our kids waiting for in their schools or at their schools? They are basically waiting to become adults. And that's when the knowledge will become actual. And that's when they will understand why they have been learning grammar or why they have been learning how to calculate the square root of 256, maybe. Or maybe they will become adults and they will go to TEDx event and they will understand what the prime numbers are. But we really lay a great hope on them that they are very good planners so that they can see from their first grade up ahead for 12 years, how the life is going to be and how their adulthood is going to be, and how, for example, they will be able to use the skill of waiting and pretending to be interested in something, in a boring meeting, and pretending to be taking notes. And in order for them to make their lives at schools bearable, they're also preached with semi-religious texts from medieval times. They're told that they have to endure while they're at schools. They have to suffer. And if they suffer enough, they will get into the paradise. And the paradise may look like this. So the paradise may look like a college, or the paradise may look like your graduation after the college. So you are constantly going to stages where you will eventually get to your destination. But it is important to understand that waiting is not just a philosophy around which the schools are built, or it's not just these psychological conditions that our kids are in. But waiting is also part of the daily routine of our students. They are constantly waiting for other kids to learn something that they have learned already. They are waiting for someone to finish their assignments so that they can get another assignment. They are waiting for teachers to go through hundreds of homeworks so that they can get feedback. And that is happening in every school, every day. 2 weeks ago, I was visiting a class of first graders. And the teacher there, she really wanted to impress me. She was there to show her best lesson. So she did a lot of things during the class. And at the end of the class, she asked these first graders, so kids, what did we learn during this lesson? And so the kids answered, we had fun, we danced. And the teacher was so disappointed. She said, no, kids, what did we learn? And they said, oh, we know, we danced and we had music in the class. And the teacher was asking again and again, and they were answering again and again, we had fun, we danced. So did these kids really dance all class long? No. It was just 2 minutes allocated to dancing and music so that they could stretch and they could have fun. But that was the only thing that they remembered out of this class, because all the rest of the time, they were waiting for each other to finish doing their work at the blackboard, to fill in the blanks, to answer the question, to retell something, and that was it. And it is interesting that on the next day, I visited the same class again, and the same story repeated. And it was evident that for this teacher, kids being active, them having fun was not part of her plan. She didn't want that to happen. She wanted them to be serious. They wanted them to concentrate, to wait, to learn something serious. And that was not going to happen while they were having fun. And so what do you do when you are waiting for something? You try to take shortcuts and you try to invent games. And when I was thinking about this speech, I tried to remember what games I played. And there were literally tens of games that I played during the class. I'm pretty sure, and I see on the faces, that you did play those games as well. Maybe we played with each other sometime. And the problem is that we played all these games against the rules. So we were not supposed to have fun during the lessons. And so no one really recognized that we wanted to be kids when we were kids. So we didn't want to fool around once we would grow up. And what this results in is that these spaces where we get education, they become foreign to us. And once they become foreign while we are school kids, that idea continues while we become adults. And so you see the students in Georgian universities dressed up like during the lectures or during their classes, as if they're waiting for a train or for a plane. They are ready to leave as soon as possible when the class ends. So they have their coats on. And you see that also on the pictures that the universities post. They don't even understand that this is a place of transition for the students, but not the place where they feel themselves home. But it is important to recognize that while we are asking our students to wait patiently, teachers do not want to wait themselves. According to this research, which was done in the United States, teachers wait on average, less than a second for a student to answer their questions. So if the student doesn't answer, the teacher answers it themselves or transfers the right to answer to another student. And so the students have to compete with each other, and the participation decreases. And it is amazing that if only teachers would increase their waiting time for just 2 seconds, 1, 2, per child, the participation would increase, the kids would collaborate, the answers would be longer, and they would be more meaningful. And we come here to solutions. So increasing waiting time is one of the solutions, but we have to concentrate on others. I'm pretty sure that if I asked you what the solutions were, you would come up with hundreds of them, and because everyone has a solution for education system. But what I'm thinking about is that maybe we should concentrate on 3 areas. The first area is how we pose the problems for our kids and what kind of problems they are. The second is how we provide the feedback, and the third is how we design spaces and how we use those spaces at our schools. Take a look at these 2 problems. They're very different. The first one at the top is a typical math problem that we give our students at schools to solve. How many of you had a problem to solve that you had to calculate when your train with someone else's train moving towards your train? Could you raise it? Oh my God. There are so many people traveling by trains, meeting other people traveling towards them. But the kids don't travel by trains that often. Some kids haven't even seen a train in their lives. So it's really hard for them to understand this problem. And the problem is very artificial in the sense, because it even says that the trains are going to be on the same track, they're going to meet, they're going to crash at some point in this problem, even though the problem doesn't say. And let's take a look at the second problem. The second problem is a real-life problem. So it's about someone who needs to be somewhere at the right time. So if a kid knows how long the bus takes from the bus stop to the school, when the school starts, and how often the buses come to the bus stops, they have to be able to calculate the optimal time at which they had to be at the bus stop. How many of you solved that second problem? You're like me, I didn't solve it either. But the second problem is much better problem, because it can relate to kids who are traveling by bus. What is also important is that we design the feedback systems so that we allow time for kids to think, as we talked about already, but at the same time the feedback has to be quick. The kids should not wait for weeks to get their feedback on their essay that they develop. They may get the feedback instantly if we use more technologies. For example, this one is an example of an electronic lesson that we developed last year for a school where I work. And it gives the opportunity to kids to do some exercises, to listen to some videos, and to experiment with clicking things on the window. And they get the feedback not just about whether they're right or wrong, but what could have been done for them to go in the right direction. It is also very important that we recognize that the spaces that we use in our schools are not really designed for learning. This is my son, sitting in the middle, turned away, I don't know doing what, but it is clear that he cannot even exit out of his seat. He had to move his table backwards in order to get into that space. And that's a central school in Tbilisi. So we have to redesign our spaces so that kids feel themselves home. But they also have to be able to move around, to collaborate, to discuss, to experiment, to try out others' ideas which they would see from the table next door. So the schools can be organized as workshops. Or we could also learn from the modern corporations, like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, who design the spaces for people to not only to work, but also to have fun, to have private spaces where they can be alone when they feel like being alone. And it is obvious that we don't have to really look very far away in order to know how to design the spaces. We have schools right here in Tbilisi, and this is the American Academy in Tbilisi where I work, where there are spaces for kids to collaborate, to learn, to discuss, to share, to experiment, to negotiate, to build the relationships. So we have spaces here in Georgia which we could look at in order to learn how to design them and how to use them, which is also very important. But unless we shift philosophically from and away from the pedagogy of waiting, we will be always relying on the teachers like Mr. Pickering to inspire one particular individual to find their calling. So it would not be school as a system, but certain individual teachers who would be changing our lives. And so what I'm trying to advocate is the philosophy that is best exemplified by this phrase from John Dewey, that schools should prepare kids and not for today. They should live their lives today, and they should not be just waiting to become adults to live their life at its fullest. So what I'm suggesting is that you join the believers and we change the pedagogy of waiting towards the pedagogy of life. Thank you very much.